There we go. Cool. So, hi everyone. Thanks for coming. A quick intro for me. Oh, I just spotlight. Hello. I just got a big picture of my face on the screen, which I wasn't expecting. Yeah, quick intro for me. I'm Tom. I'm director of customer experience and the DPO for Trust Keith. So I look after all of the customer-facing side of what we do. We're obviously a data protection company, and we help lots of startups, scale-ups with data protection. And one of the key people that we work with tends to be head of ops, COOs, stuff like that. My role, as I say, is I look after the customer-facing side. So I look after the DPOs, the data protection advice, product and stuff like that. And today, very excitingly, joined by Will Beaton, previously of MyTutor, who is a Trust Key customer, and now at Notpla. Will, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Notpla, who's also a Trust Key customer now. So yes, I'm Will. So I'm chief of staff covering for the COO at Notpla, who's on maternity. And yeah, I guess I worked a couple of businesses in startup world, like scaling, seed, Series A through to Series B. We're currently at Notpla looking at our Series B funding. And yeah, looking to recently sort of brought in more controls and more process around sort of data and data protection.
Nice. Cool. Thanks, Will. So yeah, we're here today obviously to talk about some of the requirements and the expectations and stuff as you progress through the series. We're looking at kind of like Series B and onwards. Will, do you want to talk us through some of the things that you saw in your time, both at MyTutor, which obviously had gone beyond that, and now at Notpla, which I know is moving towards
that? The things I'd seen in terms of
the impact of moving through the funding stages in terms of your data protection
sure.
expectations and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess well, one of the things you kind of go through is obviously due diligence is a big one. And I guess anyone who's raised maybe Series A versus Series B, like the level of maybe like scrutiny and like the deep dive that they'll do is, there is a level up there. So, you do need to make sure you've got your ducks in a row in terms of a data perspective, policies, controls, like risk management, accountability is definitely a big one. Also, usually, but not always, what comes with Series B is like a lot more headcount. So suddenly you've got like way more variables that you're dealing with. Maybe you've got people that are like scattered over the world or, operating remotely. So it's trying to have more sort of like maybe controls in place, more structure in place. But also, you kind of can't be everywhere at once. So like how you can kind of devolve power a little bit as well. So like, yes, some high level controls, but also like how can we have, people across the business who understand data and will be a champion for that and make sure things are followed. And I guess maybe the other thing as well is just like some of the speed that has to happen, often where you're taking on more money, maybe there's like the growth expectations comes are faster and like the how quick you have to move. So I guess it's quite important, I guess, going from Series A to Series B, like, have you got those foundations in place? Are you going to be able to scale quickly off the back of it? Like, if you do add 100 people, like, what foundations are you having? Because if you're starting absolutely from scratch, or you've not sort of done some of the groundwork, it can be quite difficult then to really move at speed. So yeah, that's a few things. Yeah.
And fundamentally, you talked about kind of the due diligence side of it being part of it. That's obviously a huge reason why data protection was important and is important to the way you do this now. Why else would you say that data protection is important to the day-to-day of running the business? And particularly on that, you spoke about the due diligence side, as I said, but it was just about making sure that you were delegating it and stuff like that. Like, why? What was your kind of key driver for that?
Yeah, so I guess a couple of other reasons like why it's important. I guess like more specifically to not blur. I guess some of these will be general. It's like the clients we work with. We work with some pretty big clients, or we're trying to, who are maybe a lot further on and have more robust policies and maybe higher expectations. So I guess it's like, who are the people that you're playing with? Like, what playground are you in? So it might be that you're it's a very small company, but if you're working with these large companies that have high expectations, maybe a global, can you meet their requirements as well? So another one's, like the customer base you're working with. so I guess that's like B2B customers, that might be more of a thing. And then delegating, I guess, as you scale, when you're a small company, maybe under 30 people, it's easy to kind of, people wear a lot of hats. You can kind of have that oversight, over the systems, you've got the tools. But, I definitely see it. We have a register of all the services that we use, and you go away and come back and there seems to be like 4 more added. And you think, where on earth have these come from and who's owning these? So, a lot just starts to happen and you can't have complete oversight. So you do need to kind of delegate control, delegate understanding, context, to make sure that like we are upholding due process and avoiding any sort of fines or trouble, or just misusing customer data, anything like that. It's really important.
Well, one thing I've found is that communicating that why is so important to getting people bought in. If you want to delegate and share the responsibilities and get more people as part of the kind of a rollout of data protection, giving them a strong why, reflecting that's like the business mission, vision, etc., can be really important in terms of a lot of people react to it as, well, I don't want to do this. I've got a day job to do. Like, why am I taking on these extra responsibilities or extra red tape? Or we're a startup, we're meant to be innovative. Why are we adding bureaucracy and stuff like that? Coming back to that why, I've always found there's been one of the key aspects of like getting people to change, getting people to be invested in what we're doing, getting people to be interested in the data protection side of it, and not just see it as a frustrating add-on to the role.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we, like you say, like frame it around values is a good way. I think that's kind of what you mentioned, or the mission. It's like we have a couple. One is like we care. It's one of ours internally. So again, like we care about our customers, our data. How we do with these, our suppliers. Another one like sustainability as well. So like building sustainable business, can come under that arm. We're obviously a sustainability business, and not obviously, but we are a sustainability business. And but also thinking about sustainability of the way the business runs, the health of the business. It isn't sustainable to kind of have poor data practices as you're growing. It isn't sustainable. Some of the operating methods you might have from when you're a small business, and thinking about how you can kind of run a sustainable business moving forward. I think framing around that has been helpful to try and build a bit more of a data culture, which is definitely ongoing. I would say it's never done.
Yeah, no, it isn't. It isn't. And in terms of building that sustainability, what kind of things? How do you balance the need to keep data protection as something that's important at senior level? It needs to come from the top, with the fact that at some point you're going to have to delegate some of these responsibilities. How do you keep those things? How do you keep that in line?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a question I could do more on, but I think even before that, like you said, it's not always easy getting buy-in at the top for some of this data stuff. As you said, normally you maybe work with like COOs, maybe CTOs, CFOs, I don't know, but probably not many CEOs, or CMOs, maybe less so as well, who again, I often deal with a lot of customer data. So it can be a battle. And again, to really go back to the why, why we're doing this is obviously really important, even for the senior team. Also, I guess like trying to make it accessible to them as possible. How you report on it, what's the cadence, what's the important metrics that you want to be tracking on a regular basis. So yeah, it can be tough, and we've obviously set up, we've got a risk register, we've got our like regular meetings, and then like how we report on that. They may be getting pressure from the board as well, I guess, which could be a reason that they're engaged. So yeah, I think engaging your senior teams is one battle, and then how you feed that through. Yeah, I think obviously identifying. I sort of talked about before, and it's something that Just Keith kind of really push with others, like identifying your champions early on. The different people across the business. It can be really seen as like a development piece as well, particularly like startups. People are looking for opportunities to like grow and take on new responsibility. So like finding someone who is looking for a new string to their bow, like give them this responsibility, let them prove like a sort of some leadership credentials, and maybe project management credentials as well. So identifying those people early on, and yeah, I guess like having that team that then spread that message, and how do you report against this stuff? Does it need a space in your like monthly meeting? Maybe not every month, but once a quarter. Is there how do you give it the importance and the weight that it deserves, really? And it's not going to be the same for everyone, but I guess it's like figuring out what that is important.
It was one of the challenges that a lot of kind of head of ops and people that we speak to in that similar kind of role face is that they've got to convince up and down. They're going to convince the senior team to do stuff about this. They've got to convince people more junior to get involved in the day to day. And this is kind of battle between getting the senior team on board is probably your best way to get the junior people on board, because they're the people that are going to have to lead by example. They're going to drive this and bringing it into things. Once you bring it into things like OKRs or KPIs or things you're monitoring or measuring, it becomes seen as a priority in the business. It becomes part of the day to day, and I think that's one of the key shifts that really happens over time is that it just becomes one of the many things that is important to us, rather than this big other project. When it's this big other project, it's so hard to embed it in the day to day, because it's this other thing on top of your day job. You've got to do this, rather than, no, this is your day job. This is part of it. This is your day to day, because this is part of the company's day to day. This is part of everything that we do. This is no different to saying we've got to pay our taxes and we've got to have our accounts in order. We don't go, oh God, I just want to work on finance strategy. I don't want to have to pay that. I mean, yeah, we do, to be fair. So we don't have to pay our taxes and stuff, but that's an accepted part of business. And it's about getting this, I think, into the same kind of way, because by the time you're getting to Series B and beyond, as you said earlier, Will, you're growing fast, you're adding lots of people, and it gets to a point where this becomes more and more and more and more difficult. The earlier you can bring this in as you're planning to go through the series, as you're at Series A and you're going to Series B, the earlier you can bring this in, the earlier you can be creating that culture, the easier that's going to be for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like you said, like they're probably like, when you are going to kick this off, there is essentially like a kickoff project. Like you said, like build it into your OKRs. It was in my kind of individual goals for this quarter to like really get things going. So there is that initial piece. But yeah, the quicker you can kind of get it into the day to day, the BAU, you're not then having to sort of like every year, it's like another one of my goals is now assigned to this data thing, and another one. And obviously every time you get bigger, the project itself becomes bigger and there's more variables. So yeah, I think that's so important, like getting it into the, like kicking it off, taking the leap, but then building it into the day-to-day as quick as possible. Yeah, is a big one.
Where if you could do it all again, we talk about MyTutor, we're working with Notpla, we're kind of doing it all again, and we're kind of starting from a different place, I guess. What would you do? Like, where would you start? What would you do differently? How would you be preparing differently for going through to the due diligence and getting to a place where you're building it into the culture and getting the senior team brought in? Like, what lessons have you learned along the way that you'd say that didn't work? I wouldn't do that again.
Gosh, yeah. I think back to MyTutor. It wasn't necessarily like investor due diligence that really came out or good surprises. We kind of got government contracts, which really like changed. And MyTutor was a tutoring company working with like pupils, so like student data, like huge amounts of data, and working directly with schools, local authorities, academies. So suddenly the expectations just like shifted up overnight. We were suddenly trying to write tenders, and it's like building the car as it moves kind of thing, of like we're trying to fill out forms about how we do stuff, even though we don't actually do that thing, but we know by the time it comes out, can we have it in place? And at the same time we were scaling from 50 to 250 people in the space of 2 years. So I wish we'd started probably 18 months earlier, to be honest. So yeah, exactly what would I do differently? Yeah, I wish we'd sort of been more proactive and like got the foundations in place, because we were, obviously you were there, Tom. We were building off. We had some stuff in place, but fairly shaky. There was a lot of like from scratch, which is where I am with Notpla at the moment. Luckily, we're not kind of like hockey sticking the team. Like I've probably come in a bit earlier on this one, having learned from the mistakes last time, or the lessons from last time. So we're about 70 people. But yeah, I feel much more comfortable with like the work we're doing around managing the risk, the policies are in place, like the progress we're making. But yeah, I just like start early. I would say it took us I mean, it's still a battle. I mean, to get the leadership on board, like I wish maybe I'd put more effort into, yeah, like I said, the CMOs, the CEOs, like really buying those senior leaders in. I think, yeah, the CFOs, the COOs, CTOs, maybe it's an easier swing. But yeah, I think really making sure you buy in early the leadership, I think will definitely help move things along.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, and I think one of the things you say is a key point that's often forgotten when it comes to funding and stuff like that is when we talk about data protection and funding, a lot of the conversations around how do you prepare for the funding, how do you prepare for the due diligence, how do you do all of those things. I think what's often forgotten is what do you do after that? To say you get the funding and you do grow and you do have that kind of hockey stick growth, and you do have that big expansion. How do you keep that up? Because if you're going for Series C, the expectation is going to be higher. If you're going for Series D, E, etc., if you're going for mergers, acquisitions, all of those sorts of things, the expectations grow and grow. You can't just kind of prep for the due diligence past that and then go, right, we're done. And that was I think certainly a lot of the experience with one of the things out with MyTutor is it takes time. We could get to a point where we can pass the due diligence and we can get the contracts and we can win the tenders and that. But then there's still a whole journey to take, which is how do we make this part of the day-to-day? How do we roll this out? How do we get this humming? How do we get this working and working behind the scenes so it's not something that we have to constantly be like, hey, you doing this? Hey, you doing that? It's not just about like passing that, jumping over that hurdle and then going, right, I'm done now. I can take a break. It's like, well now what?
Yeah. And I guess as well, yeah, like you said, like you can throw as much resource as you want as some things, but some things just do take a certain amount of time. So, like say you've got X number of policies to roll out, there's 10 new policies that, you didn't have that we need, breach policy, etc. There's only so much information a company can absorb. There's only so many like policies that can launch in a certain space of time.
Yeah.
So even if you've got your whole ops team focusing on this thing to like, approve, get the policies, embedding them just does take a certain amount of time, like making it feel live. So like, no matter how much resources you throw at something, there is an amount of time that things take. So yeah, like probably you want to be maybe over planning on that side of things and bearing in mind how long it can take to embed these things.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a few questions from the community at large as well. And I'm going to introduce at this point Mitch, who's on the call. He's Trustke's head of revenue, but today acting as our glamorous assistant who's going to be facilitating the questions and everything. Mitch, what have we got?
Yeah, so a couple of questions that come in. Some of them have come in from this event and some of them have just come into the Slack channel generally. I'm going to throw them out here. The first one is, what type of questions should I expect from investors at Series B? And like, is there a common standard that we should be aware of?
No, I think there isn't a common standard. There are lots of similarities. I think they're going to be expecting you. We talk about, this is one of the things that we talk about quite a lot, is that kind of like you've got to comply with the law. So the fundamentals are going to be asked about. The records of processing, your privacy notice is going to have to be up to scratch. You're going to have to understand where your data is and how that works. You're going to have your lawful basis sort out, understand how you use consent, if you use consent, have your risk assessments in place and things like that. Those are the kind of like standard things that get asked.
Yeah,
there isn't like an industry standard, and some of them differ wildly. Well, I don't know about in your experience, but certainly with mine, you get Series B that are like, do you do data protection? You say yes, and they go great. And then you get others that are like, we bring in a specialist law firm who are going to properly look and interrogate. It's not just good enough that you have a records of processing. We want to jump on a call with you to ask you, why have you got that lawful basis? It's such a varied experience.
Yeah, absolutely. In the same way that, some will want to speak to specific, clients and customers, and some just, they want to see revenue, they'll see specific invoices. So I guess, yeah, the best thing to do is like, I guess if you know the people who have worked with those investors, maybe you can like chat to some other companies and like get a sense of maybe what they're asking. Maybe what their profile is. I guess if you've got like the person who's in charge of the fund has got a finance background, they're probably going to come at Hardy Finances. If you're dealing with someone who's an ex-DPO, I'd say probably buckle up on that one.
I don't know if there are many POVCs out there, but
No.
probably are. There probably are. I definitely come across one where I wouldn't be surprised if they were, because yeah, it was pretty intense. And yeah, it's luck of the draw, isn't it? It depends on what they're like, the background, like you say. Yeah, I think that's. But I think a little bit like Will was saying earlier, over prepare is better than being under prepared. If you're starting these things early, if you're getting those basics in place, there's no reason you shouldn't pass that due diligence. Like if you're doing what you should be doing, from a data protection perspective, you should sail through them.
Yeah. And Will, have you come across any specific standards that investors have asked you to meet, or has it been a bit more vague? Because I know we definitely see a wide range when it comes to like investment data protection standards.
I mean, not this round. I mean, yeah, you said it's fairly varied. I guess like some, probably the more strict was around, like, again, when we were doing like the government stuff, like ICO accreditation, it's obviously a big one. Yeah, like Tom says, like get your baseline policies in base, like track the risk. The big thing we learned along the way was like, there's obviously like certain things that you will need to be in place, but you don't actually have to be perfect. A lot of it's like, are you aware of where you're not hitting it, and like what are you going to do to get there, and like how long is that going to take, and what resources you're giving to it. That's a big part of it, because like these investors, they know they're not investing in the finished product. They know they're not going to have some perfect polished business. But like if you're in, as I said, if you're in early, you're aware of where that stuff is, and you're making progress, that's a really good start. And yeah, that's definitely helped us in the past, like how to frame it.
That's good.
I think that's a really good point. I completely agree there. That the effort that you've put in goes a long way, and if you can show that you're making progress and you're going in the right direction, absolutely, I completely agree with you there. Well, I think that's been key, and I think it's also a sense of over prepare in that sense, but also be mindful, I think, of saying, oh my God, we've got due diligence coming up, we need 400 policies. Don't fall into that trap of going too far, and putting in place all kinds of complex policies that you've got no hope of fulfilling or adhering to at this stage, because you just don't have the resources. That's as much a waste of time as well. So you got to find that balance, but at least have those basics in place, the kind of key things that we talk about quite a lot. Have those in place and show effort, and be willing to justify if there are things you don't have in place. Have a justification for it, and more often than not, that justification works if you can clearly show, well, this is why. Like we don't do this because we don't have the resources, but we're working towards it. At least you can show you've thought about it and understood the risk that comes with it.
Yeah, that's a good point. It says it's okay to not say yes to every single one of these questions, right? As long as you understand 100%. Why you're saying no, basically. Yeah,
100%.
This one's
if you're saying no and you don't understand why you're saying no, you don't have a saying no, you probably should be saying yes. That's the rule. Yeah.
Nice, thanks. So this one is a very interesting question that come from a chief operating officer in the general channel of the Slack a few weeks ago. Kind of linked into what we're talking about. The question is, context, I'm looking to solve compliance with data and security standards like ISO 27001, GDPR, and potentially SOC 2 and HIPAA. In my last role, we had a cross-functional group which I led that was responsible for using a tool called OneTrust. My question is, how are people structuring and managing compliance when you are way off justifying a full-time employee? And there's a second part to that question, but I think that as in itself is it's enough to spend a whole event talking about, to be fair. So then Tom and Will, any thoughts?
OneTrust will not save you. OneTrust is built for compliance teams. Like that's hardcore. That's the real hardcore of the spectrum. Using OneTrust is something that DPOs who are in big corporates use. That's not a good starting point. It's a great software, it's a great system, but it's not appropriate for most startups to scale up. So you want to move away from that scale for sure. Will, do you want to contribute because of how you structured and stuff in previous businesses, previous roles?
Yeah, I mean, it started off as something that we probably weren't thinking about at all, and then this thing GDPR came in, and we thought, oh, what's this? And you're starting to get more kind of clients and customers are coming back to you with questions that maybe you don't understand. I think initially we tried to use like lawyers because we just had lawyers on training, and like I think it was like really expensive, and actually some of the work actually wasn't like exactly what we were looking for. It wasn't quite the right fit. And again, not having any expertise in house, at this point we're still probably only like that goes around the 50-person mark. We opted for a Trust Keith solution, so like an external third party who like gives you like I guess like fractional resource over each month to help you understand like where you're at, where you need to be for business of your size and growth plans, what kind of remedial actions you need to take, and then like just monitoring against that. As I said, we then had that kind of like, big government contracts with quadrupling in size, so we're able to like ramp up what we were looking for like a bigger org, and again had to do a hell of a lot of work. And then we did get to size. We were about, I think MyTutor when I left was about 250, 260 people. And there was, we had a legal in who had a compliance team. So we're still working with Trust Keith. We scaled things back down again, so it's the right size for kind of what we were at with our stage. Obviously, we've done a lot of that heavy lifting in the first place. But I think there can always be a place for that, until you're a really big organization. I've just started at Notpla, and again, come in, there's absolutely 0. It's been me as an individual. I'm by no means a data expert. Obviously, I've picked some things up over the years, but again, have opted for a sort of a third-party solution in Trust Keith. We're a smaller company and like less growth, so we've gone, maybe smaller on the support. That's the right size for us, but I've already made some really good progress. I've got kind of a senior leader that's working on it with me, so I've kind of got that leadership buy-in, and then I've got my champions. So it's just about kind of starting to kind of like roll things out really and build a bit of a culture around it.
You're underselling yourself a bit, Will. I think you know a lot more than most from your experience. But yeah, I think one thing that I would add to that, Mitch, is that bundling all of those things together, where I'm going to be going with this. You're talking about GDPR, you're talking about ISO, you're talking about HIPAA, you're talking about SOC 2. Some of those are laws, some of those are optional standards. And it's important not to conflate the two. You have to comply with the law. I don't know who made that rule, and I know that lots of people don't like it, but take it up with them. You have to comply with it. That's how it works. So if you are working in the US with protected health information, you have to comply with HIPAA. It's not some optional standard that you can be like, no, I don't really feel like it is. We don't need a HIPAA standards or anything. It's the law. That's what you have to do. The same goes for the UK GDPR, the EU GDPR, the Data Protection Act in this country, privacy and electronic communication regulations. There are laws that you have to follow. That's called data protection. And that's what that's all concerned about. Data protection is concerned with the laws of the land, the regulation, and how that works. You also have things like information security standards. Now, those are optional. You don't need ISO 27001. You don't need SOC 2. There is no government organization, there is no legislative body, there is no regulator that is demanding that you put those things in place. You will find, however, that there'll be some contracts that ask you to have ISO 27001, or ask you to have SOC 2, or ask you to comply with those standards because they themselves have it and they want to work with people like that. But it is an optional thing. It's a business decision. Complying with the law isn't really a business decision. You kind of have to do it. So it's really important not to conflate them all together as well, because it puts them in the sense of, we're not going to bother with GDPR today because we're working on ISO. And it's like, well, we're not going to bother complying with the law today because we've got this other project that we don't actually have to do. We're just choosing to do. So I think it is important just to pull those things out and to note that we're not talking about the same things here. Don't conflate standards with laws. They're completely different things. And they're different skill sets and they're different areas of expertise. Working with a DPO, you're going to be working with someone who's familiar with the laws, the regulations, the way that works. Working with an information security specialist, you're going to be working with someone who is used to the standards like ISO 27001 and how they work. Those are different things. It's like working with a marketer and a salesperson. Different things, but they all point to the same thing, which is getting more business for you as a thing. It's the same with data protection and information security. They're different skill sets that all point to the same thing. And to bring that all back where I'm going with this, to bring that all back to your point, Will, around MyTutor hiring a legal team and a compliance team and still working with Trust Keith, it's precisely because of that. These are areas of specialisms. And you can hire a general compliance person in a business who may still need to rely on specialist experts in various areas, because they might need to be a compliance person who's bringing together finance standards and medical device standards and security standards and children's code standards and safeguarding and data protection. And you can't expect that person to be an expert in all of those things. That is unreasonable. And so it's also worth noting that even, there isn't a silver bullet of we'll just hire a DPO. Well, that DPO, great, it's going to solve that, but it's probably not going to be very good on the information security side or the safeguarding side. So it's also worth thinking about how you structure, and having that generalist compliance person is often a really good solution, as long as you're able to then support them with some specialists at times to time as well. And that's precisely the model that we're working with MyTutor now, and it works really well. And who knows, one day Notpla might expand to the point where you have compliance people, and particularly being in the sustainability world, there's going to be standards and stuff from a compliance perspective that are going to be focused on completely different things to data protection. You think of environmental standards and things like that. And you might have a generalist compliance person who would expect to know a bit more about that, who may also pick up some data protection things, for example, because they've got the word compliance in their title. It would be unreasonable, obviously, to expect them to be an expert in all these environmental regulations and also in data protection. So that's one thing just to watch out for. These are different things, different standards, different laws. It can be complicated. Be careful in terms of just conflating them all together and saying, well, it's all the same thing. If you can do compliance, you can do all of it. Can't hear you.
Across the 60 or so customers that you've had the experience of working with and in the past, what are some of the common traits in companies that do have in-house compliance teams? And the reason I'm asking that is, like, how can companies or operators ascertain if or when they do need to start hiring internally, as opposed to just relying on external service providers, things like that?
It all comes down to risk, the risk profile of the business. If you're in a heavily regulated industry, you're going to need help with this more often, because it's when that role becomes a value add. So if you're in a heavily regulated industry, they're going to add value quite early, because you're going to have to navigate complex frameworks and standards and all that kind of stuff from day one. Or if you're working in a particularly high risk area, like providing mental health advice and things like that, it comes to a point where having someone internally is going to support you on that much more quickly. If you're working in somewhere that produces physical goods, like Notpla, for example, the decision around as kind of data protection specialist internally is probably going to be later than if you're working with, say, mental health, where that might come earlier. It's all based on the risk of the data. But then, as I say, there's generalist compliance roles out there that will focus on different things. And for Notpla, as an example, might choose to hire a compliance person more on the environmental side of things and the sustainability side. Again, it's when that person becomes a value add, when that person can bring something and add a value and make a difference to the business. So it's very hard to answer. We work with some that do, some that don't. The ones that do almost invariably are much higher risk businesses.
And I guess ultimately, like, just treat it like any kind of hire or use external. Like, do you hire a marketer or do you use an external SEO? Like, it's the same with everything. Like, how much is there to be done? How important is it? I said, like, what's the risk profile, etc. And like, what would the job split be? What would it cost to go external? What would it cost to go internal? And how much work is to be done, or like, how much work can I do if I'm currently shouldering the responsibility and I've got 6 other hats that I'm wearing because the startup's growing? Like, at what point do you make the call? So yeah, just treat like everything else.
It's good. The follow-up question, or the second part of the question here, is: has anyone used tools such as OneTrust and Vantar? Does anyone have any strong opinions? So Will, be interesting to start with you. Have you used any tools, and any opinions?
No, I haven't used any of those, not knowingly anyway. So no opinions, sorry.
Tom, anything to share? No worries if not.
string of everything.
Are we losing Tom?
I think we are. Sorry, I missed Jim.
There you go. I
Tom?
think he's probably back.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I think we can. We can now.
I don't know what
Yeah,
happened
you're
there.
back.
I could hear you all, so it's a good job you didn't say anything about me because I could hear you that time. Yeah, so One Trust hardcore. That's where I was going with that one. But in terms of other software, there's some good software out there. There's some good things out there from a software perspective. Just be mindful that software can only do so much for you. It's like everything in life. Software can only take you so far. It's not going to provide you any expertise or guidance on gray areas, particularly around like data protection. There's some great tools out there for kind of ticking the boxes and going through. But then when a complex subject access request comes in, what are you going to do? You can't ask a tool at the moment. Maybe AI will change that one day, but you can't ask a tool at the moment. How do I respond to this subject access request? So I think it's a balance. Some of these tools out there are great, but there still might be a need to have someone who can support you through that. I think that's one of the things that's central to what we do here at TrustKeith. We provide the tool, but there's no option to work with us that doesn't also provide an expert, because data protection is great. There's a lot of areas that people need help with, and we recognize that, and that's a big part of what we do. So I think, yeah, they're not going to solve everything for you. They will make some things easier for you, absolutely, but they're not a silver bullet that's just going to make this problem go away, which some people do want. They just want to download a tool, and then data protection ceases to be a problem. And yeah, unfortunately, as of today, that doesn't exist.
Nice. I've got one more question. In the meantime, if anyone has any questions in the audience, please do submit it into the chat box, or and in the meantime, got a final question, which is a bit of an open-ended one. It's how do I identify the right time to implement data protection measures at my company?
Have you started a company? Then
Yeah.
yes, it's the right time. I think my view on this is obviously somewhat biased, because this is my area. But I think, like Will was saying earlier, you can't wait and then do it at some point later. You know, it's so much more difficult. It becomes so much more problematic. It causes you so many more problems. The earlier you can start building these foundations in, the better. And what we're not talking about, to be absolutely clear, as much as I'm biased, I'm not a complete fool. You're not going to have a massive complex data protection framework as a 2-3 person startup. That would be ridiculous. No one should ever ask you to do that. No one should ever ask you to have 24 policies on data protection if you're a 2-person, 3-person startup. You know, that's a complete waste of time. You're doing it wrong. That is absolutely not the approach to take. But some of these basics you can start doing earlier. Some of these things, like thinking about things before you process data. Think about it. Do we need this data? Do we understand it? Do we know where this is going? Working out some of the implications, working with suppliers. You know, we've got companies out there that are wholly reliant on a particular supplier. And there's some cases in the past that we've dealt with customers being wholly reliant on a particular supplier, and that particular supplier is incredibly problematic and has caused them issues. And at no point did they think, we need to look into that before we start working, but base our entire business around this model. You know, unpicking those problems is way more difficult. So start thinking about it early, but be proportional with it. You know, add things in as you grow, and you can manage things and you can do things at the point that you can have secure software development policies in terms of managing your development and stuff like that. When you've got an engineering team and you're doing things perfectly great, bring that in. But if you can't manage those things, if you can't manage the kind of complex change control, don't have a policy that says to do it. You know, just don't do it. You know, to accept the risk, understand the risk, and recognize that you might be doing that later. Do the basics, get the basics in place, think about the basics, and for goodness sake, comply with the law. Don't do something illegal. Way harder to unpick something illegal 2-3 years later down the line. And it's the worst thing to have to do as a DPO, is to go to a CEO and go, I'm really sorry, but your business model is against the law. And unfortunately, have been a couple of times when I've had to do that. And that's not fun. I don't want to do that. I work in business. I get it. I want to see businesses grow, succeed. And make people lots of money. I'm all for that. So like, I don't want to have that conversation, and I don't have to have that conversation if it's been thought about early. Will, anything on your side?
Yeah, I mean, I just not as thoughtful as what Tom said, but I worked in HR as well for a number of years, and the classic one's always like founders saying, I wish I'd brought in a people person sooner. I wish I'd thought about culture sooner. And I think that's oft like you kind of hear founders constantly saying, they think, I wish I'd done this thing sooner to unpick. So I don't know, if you're starting to think about it, maybe do it. Not kind of at the time where it's like, oh, I wish I'd done that thing. So like, be on the front foot where you can, and then, you know, everything else Tom said, which is much more thoughtful.
Yeah. Just my top advice, just to sum that up, forget data protection as a topic exclusively. Start thinking about risk early. What risk does not having data protection in place have for your business? What risk does not having a people person have on your business? What risk does it? What are the risks? What are the benefits of mitigating those risks and sorting them out? What are the implications of doing so? What are the resource requirements and stuff like that? Start thinking about risk very early. It doesn't have to be specifically data protection risk. We're talking risk generally, of which data protection forms part of that. The sooner you start thinking about risk and getting into that mindset, the easier it's going to be to work out the answer to some of these questions. Should we hire a DPO or a people person? Well, I don't know. What's the risk? What's the benefit? You know, what do we? Where do we invest that budget? If you're thinking about risk early, that conversation is going to be a lot easier, and it's going to be a lot easier to sell to a senior team as well. You can present things in the topic of risk and the understanding of the implications of these things. You're far more likely to get buy-in. Whereas if you went to a CEO and said, I'd like to invest in X, Y, Z, and they said, why? And they say, well, because it's the right thing to do, versus I would like to invest in X, Y, Z. Why? Well, because if we don't, this is what could go wrong. Here are some of the benefits of doing so, and here's the impact that it's going to have on the business. You're going to be far more successful in getting that message across. So I think that's absolutely key.
Right. No more questions. So yeah, nothing else to add in terms of questions there, Tom.
There's final call for anyone who has a question here, because yeah, that's we're coming basically to the end now. So I'm gonna ramble a little bit. If a question comes in as I'm talking, I'll endeavour to ask it and answer it. But Will, thanks a lot for joining us today. It's really good to have you here, and yeah, that you're underselling yourself. You know what you're doing here, and I think yeah, great advice that you shared as well for the team. We got a question quickly, Martin. NDAs. No, I have no good ideas around NDAs, I am afraid, because I'm not a contract lawyer. So I have absolutely no idea. Will, I don't know if you've got anything on that. Have you got any experience with NDAs?
Well, not as big on NDAs because we have a lot of secrets. What's the issue?
Just speaking, I asked the question. No, it was more about enforcement of NDAs. So we sign a lot of NDAs with corporates. We've got a lot in place at the moment, and we've got a lot of resources out talking to people. And it's keeping. How do we actually? Well, good ideas around keeping them abreast and actually enforcing, getting people to abide by the NDAs we've got in place.
Yeah. So is this you're signing NDAs with larger clients and you want your team to
and then we're talking to other potential clients, yeah. And we get asked a lot about the people who've signed with us or have they signed with us, etc. It's just how we enforce that among the teams, because the NDAs keep changing in the sense that we'll have NDAs that expire and we have projects that move on, and so it's quite a challenge. Embed it in BAU.
Yeah, I think that does sound a challenge. And I mean, I guess I don't know what the scale of this is, but I guess if you've got lots of things to track, like how you're effectively tracking them, is it in some sort of CRM or some sort of like spreadsheet to make sure you know like what's expiring when? I guess like training's the other piece in terms of if it's like your sales reps or anything, like if things are constantly changing, what's the refresher training? How are you keeping them updated? so they're aware of what's going on. But yeah, I'm not entirely sure.
Tom, it sounds like more of like a cultural question around like enforcement of policies, which is something more broadly that I feel like we talk about a fair bit. Any thoughts taking that into consideration?
I think it's a large point where what Will's saying. I mean, meet people where they are. If you're using a CRM, how can that be added to the CRM if that's what people are using, or the spreadsheets or whatever people are using. I think with everything in startup scale-ups, things are changing all the time with everything. I think it's about you've got to monitor these things. You've got to keep on top of these things. You've got to enforce these things if they don't work. Unfortunately, I know we like to be all about rewarding people and stuff like that, but if people are failing to abide by that, there has to be consequences as well, as much as anything. I think you I think Will covered it as well in terms of training and awareness of this, talking about this, being really obvious about this. There's the training and the one-off training, but then there's like the weekly stand-ups or the monthly stand-ups of bringing this up as an item, as an option, as something that we talk about, something that we remind people of. Finding a way, always a good way when doing any kind of change is finding a clear why behind something, and then publicizing that. Do we have a KPI on this matter, or an OKR that we can think of that's going to help us report on this and show progress and reward people who are doing quick wins and stuff like that. But it's a tricky one. It's a perennial challenge, and you'll find, I think, a perennial challenge across all of these things. There is no silver bullet solution to keeping assets and things up to date, unless you were to code some software that did that for you and does exactly what you wanted to do, like monitor these NDAs, highlight any changes in a Slack channel, and that's plausible, I think, particularly with the advent of AI. But obviously that's quite an expense to go through to do so. But it's a plausible solution.
Yeah, and John kind of said it with the why thing. It's that kind of like context versus control piece as well. Like, you can obviously control someone, but if you've actually given the context of why this thing's really important and like what the risks are, what this could mean for the business, then that kind of, they can kind of use their brain then to like, make smart decisions. Whereas like a policy is a level of control that like people might engage with to a certain degree, but I think you really need that context, that why as well is really important, just to hammer that home.
Yeah, and hammering it home. Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and living it and doing it yourself and getting people to see that you're doing it as well. Do as I do as well as what I say is key as well. Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a perennial problem, as I say, across many of these things. Cool. I think we've come to time. Thanks everyone for joining us, and for the questions that were pre-submitted, and thank you, Martin, as well for the question at the end. And again, thanks, Will, for joining, and Mitch for hosting the Q&A at the end. Operations Nation, is there anything that you want to say as we wrap up?
Yes, thank you so much, Tom, Will, and Mitch, for having us today and answering all these questions, and as always, making it feel like data protection is a less dreaded task, as Ashrina put it so well the other day. And yeah, if any of you ever have any questions about data protection, you can find Tom on our community Slack. And yeah, don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, I'm in the channel. Send me a message if you want any help.
Absolutely. Thank you all so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.